Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. I bring you all warm greetings from the Philippines. Welcome to our brief discussion exploring case studies of online sexual exploitation of children. Now, as circumstances would have it, I'm streaming to you from a room full of Lego bricks or building blocks. These are my kids' favorite toys. And I happen to be broadcasting from their playroom where the natural light is best. Today, we're going to do something similar to what a child does when they walk into a room full of building blocks. We're going to imagine what is possible and see what good things we can build together. But first, let's start with some bad news on the next slide. A very disturbing truth. ABC reported in 2020 that 256 Australians were found to have spent more than $1.3 million watching child sexual abuse online. This almost unbelievable statistic is but a piece of a larger global problem of online sexual exploitation of children. It appears to be at an all-time high. Today, we're not just looking at that problem, we're also looking at solutions. Before I go further, in case any of you want to keep in touch after this discussion, my contact details are available at the next slide. Now, among my treasured experiences with International Justice Mission over the past nearly 15 years has been serving as legal counsel for survivors of online sexual exploitation of children. In this role, I've supported law enforcement rescue operations, criminal prosecutions, and aftercare case management from casework as far back as 2011, which is when we first started seeing online sexual exploitation appearing in our casework. And the big idea behind this close collaboration with the government is shown in the next slide. To end violence, we must end impunity. To create a preventive and protective effect, we must first end impunity and bring the power of accountability to the place where children need it the most. Now, at International Justice Mission, where I work, primarily our support goes to governments so that they can strengthen their own justice systems and protect people in poverty from violence. That's happening in 29 offices, 17 countries around the world, each tackling a form of modern slavery. And in the Philippines, where our main program against online sexual exploitation of children takes place, you'll see in the next slide that our focus is on a very specific crime type. And the unit that I'm part of, the Center to End Online Sexual Exploitation of Children, focuses very specifically on the global collaborations required to end this crime for good. As you know, there are many crimes that fall under the umbrella of online sex offending. And the Philippines program focuses on addressing the trafficking of children to produce new child sexual exploitation materials, or CSEM, referring to recordings, images, or files showing the sexual exploitation of a child. Now, in this crime, children are sexually abused by traffickers who then spread or sell images or videos of that exploitation online, even live streaming their abuse for sex offenders to direct from anywhere in the world. The primary source of information for today's discussion is available to you. You can see in the next slide that you can download it using a QR code. This resource itself focuses on a few case studies, but there is a larger body of casework supported by IJM that surrounds it. And we have an experience with over 300 child protective operations showing that child sex offenders globally use popular internet platforms on the surface of the internet to contact traffickers and pay them to live stream child sexual abuse online. And that these offenders are able to control that abuse real time. As of today, there have been over 1,000 rescued from online sexual exploitation of children in Philippine operations, and over 150 offenders convicted in Philippine courts. One question we're often asked is what happens to perpetrators from other countries? Are their cases filed? And how are these resolved? We're going to look at 3 cases with a nexus between the Philippines and Australia to better understand and learn from actual rescues court cases and convictions. So the next slide shows our first case. This is the case of Vilma. Year was 2016. Australian authorities apprehended INT for purchasing sexual exploitation materials from suppliers online. One of them was a Filipina, given the pseudonym Vilma. The Australian Federal Police forwarded intelligence from this case to the Philippine National Police Women and Children Protection Center. The Visayas Field Unit's investigation uncovered that for 5 years, Vilma had been sexually exploiting her own children to live stream that CSEM to the US, Australia, and Germany. This included forcing the children to perform penetrative acts on themselves. Vilma charged between $10 to $430 for these streams. Now, our next slide shows how a global loop of shared intelligence increased the protective value of this one case. In September of 2016, Philippine police applied for a search warrant, and the Australian Federal Police testified in those proceedings remotely, helping to substantiate probable cause. After a successful rescue operation, where 3 survivors were brought to safety, the Philippines forwarded the intelligence to the German Federal Police, who then arrested Martin R. Further intelligence was also sent back to the Australian Federal Police, who then arrested Matthias B. At trial, Vilma entered into a plea agreement admitting guilt. Now, this case was very special because aftercare authorities determined that family therapy and reconciliation was appropriate. And they facilitated this with the support of the court, which was a family court, maximizing the restorative power of the entire justice process and also keeping the children from having to testify and experience re-traumatization in court proceedings. Now, what of the German and Australian offenders? You'll see in the next slide that they too were convicted. I present for your own assessment the sentences, the penalties. Vilma received a 20-year sentence, while Matthias B. 10 years, German offender Martin R. over 5 years, and INT less than 5 years. As some of you may be observing right now, there's some opportunity to ensure stronger accountability for offenders on the demand side. That's our first case. Our second one begins in the next slide. Michaela and Donald, a case where the US, the Philippines, and Australia collaborated to maximize protection. The year was 2013. Homeland Security Investigation, or HSI, arrested a United States offender for possessing CSEM, and he referred this case to the Philippines. The Philippine National Police Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force, Region 7, collaborated with the National Bureau of Investigation and USHSI to conduct a sting operation, which is a constitutionally valid method to catch an offender in the act of committing a crime. Now, this case was quite memorable. I was part of the rescue support team for this and vividly remember sights and sounds of this rescue. We'll see in the next slide that the Philippines shared intelligence from this case with Australia, and this collaboration actually resulted in the arrest of Peter S. and Raymond S. Let's take a look at the sentences in the next slide. Both Filipino traffickers received 15-year sentences, while Raymond S. and Peter S. received less than 5 years each. Let's move to our third and final case study. DRUES. This slide that you see shows the first law enforcement agency that was able to work on this case, the National Bureau of Investigation, or the NBI. And they responded to a local complaint that an Australian living in the Philippines was exploiting children. This led to a search warrant application and the eventual arrest of Drew S. for possession of child sexual exploitation materials. This case lasted many years, and it eventually resulted in a conviction. In the next slide, we'll see that the US HSI once again proactively assisted in proceedings, suspecting that a US offender might also be found in the course of investigation. While this did not happen, it is helpful that forensic experts from both NBI and HSI collaborated and shared expertise in this case. There were at least 4 agencies that joined forces to strengthen this case, as you'll see in the next slide. The Anti-Money Laundering Council, in tandem with the Office of the Solicitor General, obtained a freeze order against the assets of Drew S. This happened during trial. This lessened the risk that Drew S. would deploy resources to unduly delay or derail the case. The victims testified with the aid of judicial affidavits, sparing them from the potential re-traumatization of recounting the offense on direct examination. Now, at the end of trial, both Drew S. and his co-conspirator received 4 life imprisonment terms. There you have it. 3 cases with a nexus to Australia, connected to the Philippines as well. Our next slide has some takeaways from these cases. First, we learned from Vilma. It's very helpful to have electronic testimony from fellow law enforcers, such as the Australian Federal Police, who aided in the obtaining of that search warrant, which started this case on a good foundation. Second, the best interests of the child served as the standard for the duty of care in Michaela and Donald, where a plea agreement was reached and children were not required to testify. And one of the main reasons the prosecution saw it fit to do this was precisely to keep children away from these adult proceedings and allow their recovery to continue. Number 3, digital evidence was cited by the court in the Drew S. case as a powerful form of evidence. And this points us to the value in building strong prosecutions that do not place the burden of proving the case on the shoulders of young children. One of the biggest lessons from global collaboration is that it has to happen at the soonest possible time. Our next slide references the Philippine Internet Crimes Against Children Center. This is a multi-agency body that exists to accelerate child protective operations by institutionalizing that same collaboration that we saw in Vilma, Michaela, Donald, and Drew cases. Now, the PICACC was founded by the Philippine National Police, National Bureau of Investigation, the Australian Federal Police, the United Kingdom National Crime Agency, and the International Justice Mission. For the past 3 years, it has facilitated coordination and rescue in cases of online sexual exploitation of children, resulting in 500 victims rescued and over 180 operations. For our call to action, which you'll see in the next slide, this comes straight out of the lessons from these 3 cases and also from survivors themselves. The first is that, yes, let's pursue stronger accountability in the demand side. Policy, through the proper discussions with those that can make policy and institute legislation to protect survivors in a stronger way. Second, continue support for victim reparations. This is a perspective from survivor leaders. There is much to be gained by allowing them to pursue reparations. These resources allow them to not just look back, but forward and rebuild their lives. 3, let us strengthen the use of the best interests of the child as the standard for the duty of care. There really isn't much to be gained if we win a case, but lose the lives of our children. So let's look for good examples of how the best interests of the child are honored in cases where child protection outcomes are strong. Now, this call to action tells us what we can do. In the next slide, we are shown why we should continue the work of protection. And it is because of every single one of the 1,038 survivors that have been rescued thus far. And because of the hope that as child protection continues, there will come a day that the need for rescue is no more. That is not just wishful thinking, it is the choice we must make. And it is the future our children deserve. As we end, I invite us all to hear these words from survivor leaders through a short video in the next slide.
Of you. Our experience of rescue, prosecution, and aftercare has been good because you had the best interests in mind.
Because of you, we are now standing here as empowered survivor leaders, speaking as expert consultants.
Through doing work such as this, I wanted to encourage and inspire other survivors to stand up, to show them that we are more than survivors, to show them that we are more than what happened to us. We can make difference together.
To you, we say, let's talk so we can protect more children.
Well, thank you everyone for listening. You've been a kind audience. My final slide shows the social
like to
channels of IJM. You can follow and connect with us so that we can continue protecting children together. If time allows, I would be very happy to take questions and even share some of that question and answer time with Caitlin, again, if time permits.